You won't believe what my own son did to me. After 32 years of pouring my heart, soul, and every last penny into building our family home in Maplewood Heights, he kicked me out for his wife's convenience. But what he didn't know was that the next day I'd be walking back through that front door with someone who would change everything, the house buyer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and this is the story of how I went from being treated like an unwanted guest in my own home to reclaiming everything I'd worked my entire life to build. It's a story about betrayal that cut deeper than any knife, about a mother's love being trampled by ungrateful children, and about the sweet taste of justice when karma finally comes knocking. But let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand just how devastating this betrayal truly was. I spent 3 decades of my life building that house on Willowbrook Lane. Not just paying for it, actually building it, brick by brick, room by room, with my own 2 hands and the help of my late husband, Robert. We bought that tiny plot of land when my son Michael was just 2 years old, back when Maplewood Heights was nothing but farmland and broken dreams. I remember standing on that empty lot, holding Michael's chubby little hand, while Robert sketched out our future home in the dirt with a stick. "This is where we'll build our forever home, Ellie," he said, his eyes bright with hope. "This is where Michael will grow up, where he'll bring his children to visit Grandma and Grandpa." Those words echo in my mind now, bitter and hollow. We couldn't afford contractors, so Robert and I did everything ourselves. We mixed cement in wheelbarrows until our backs screamed. We laid every single brick during scorching summers and freezing winters. I learned to wire electrical outlets, install plumbing, and lay hardwood floors. My hands were permanently stained, with paint and calloused from years of manual labor. When Robert died of a heart attack when Michael was 16, I thought I'd have to sell the house. The mortgage payments seemed impossible on my secretary's salary, but I refused to give up on the dream we'd built together. I worked 3 jobs, secretary by day, house cleaner by night, and weekend catering assistant. I sold my wedding ring, my mother's jewelry, everything of value I owned. Every sacrifice was for Michael. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I chose to pay the mortgage instead of buying myself new clothes, it was all for him. I wanted him to have stability, to have a home base he could always return to, no matter what life threw at him. The house became our sanctuary. Michael brought his first girlfriend there. He studied for his college entrance exams at the kitchen table I'd refinished by hand. When he graduated from Riverside University with his engineering degree, we celebrated in the backyard garden I'd spent years cultivating. I thought I was building more than just a house. I thought I was building a legacy, a foundation for generations of Hartwells to come. How naive I was. Michael met Vivian Blackwood during his senior year of college. She was everything I wasn't, polished, sophisticated, from a wealthy family in the upscale Thornfield district. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels, and she'd never worked a day in her life. She looked at our modest home in Maplewood Heights like it was a quaint museum piece, something charmingly outdated that needed immediate renovation. "It has so much potential," she'd say with that practiced smile, her manicured fingers tracing the hand-carved banister Robert and I had installed ourselves. But I heard what she really meant. It wasn't good enough for her standards. After they married, they moved in temporarily to save money for their own place. That's what they told me anyway. What I didn't realize was that they saw me as the temporary one. The changes started subtly. Family photos disappeared from the mantelpiece, replaced by modern art I didn't recognize. The vintage quilts my grandmother had made were accidentally damaged and thrown away. My prized rose garden was updated with geometric hedges that looked like something from a corporate office building. But the worst part wasn't losing my possessions. It was losing my son. Michael, the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions and called them flowers, who once told me I was the strongest person in the world, that Michael disappeared. In his place was a stranger who spoke to me like I was an embarrassing relative, who sided with his wife in every disagreement, who made me feel like an intruder in the home I'd built with my own hands. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the only piece of furniture Vivian hadn't managed to replace yet, when they both walked into the living room with expressions I'd never seen before. Cold, determined, rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, not meeting my eyes. Vivian stood beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, her chin raised like a queen about to pronounce sentence. "Eleanor," she said, using my full name like a weapon. "Michael and I have been discussing our living situation, and we've decided it would be best if you found your own place." The words hit me like a physical blow. "My own place?" I whispered. "It's not healthy for a married couple to live with parents," Vivian continued, her voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly. "We need our space to build our own life together. Surely you understand that." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to tell her she was wrong, that this was my home, that I wasn't going anywhere. But he just stood there, silent as a stone, letting his wife destroy everything I'd worked for. "This is my house," I said quietly. Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, Eleanor, don't be dramatic. Michael inherited the house when Robert died. It's been his property for years now." The room spun around me. Inherited? When had that happened? When had I signed away my own home? But then I remembered something. They clearly didn't. Something that would change everything. And that's when I knew exactly what I had to do the next morning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand just how much blood, sweat, and tears went into that house on Willowbrook Lane. You need to know what they were trying to steal from me. It was 1991, when Robert and I first laid eyes on that empty plot of land in what would eventually become Maplewood Heights. Back then, it was nothing but wild grass, old oak trees, and a rusty "for sale" sign that had been there so long the paint was peeling off. The asking price was $8,000, which might as well have been $1 million to us. I was 26 years old, working as a part-time cashier at Henderson's hardware store while taking night classes to become a certified bookkeeper. Robert was a construction worker who dreamed of starting his own contracting business someday. Together, we made barely enough to cover rent on our tiny one-bedroom apartment above Morelli's Pizza on the wrong side of town. But we had something more valuable than money. We had determination and a 2-year-old son who deserved better than the life we were living. Michael was the reason for everything. When I held him as a baby in that cramped apartment, listening to the neighbors fight through paper-thin walls, smelling the grease from the pizza ovens below, I made him a promise. "You're going to have a real home, baby boy," I whispered into his soft hair. "Mommy and Daddy are going to build you the most beautiful house in the world." It took us 8 months to save that $8,000. 8 months of eating nothing but pasta and canned vegetables. 8 months of me making Michael's clothes from fabric remnants I bought at garage sales. 8 months of Robert working double shifts and coming home so exhausted he could barely kiss us goodnight. I remember the day we signed the papers at Willingham & Associates law firm. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. Mr. Willingham looked at us over his glasses like we were crazy kids playing house. "You folks sure you want to build way out there?" he asked. "It's pretty isolated. No utilities, no paved roads." "We're sure," Robert said, squeezing my hand. "We're going to build something that lasts." The first year was the hardest. We lived in a borrowed RV on the property while Robert dug. the foundation by hand. I can still see him out there in the blazing summer heat, sweat pouring down his face as he worked with a shovel and pickaxe because we couldn't afford to rent proper equipment. Michael, barely 3 years old, would toddle around the construction site in his little hard hat that Robert had bought him. "I helping, Mama," he'd say, carrying around toy tools and fixing things while I mixed cement in a wheelbarrow that was almost as big as I was. Every evening, we'd sit on overturned buckets, sharing a can of soup and watching the sunset behind the frame that would eventually become our home. Robert would point to different areas and explain his vision. "That's where the kitchen will be, Ellie, with a big window so you can watch Michael play in the backyard. And over there, that's where we'll put his swing set." We built that house one paycheck at a time. When Robert had construction work, we'd buy lumber. When I got overtime hours at the hardware store, we'd splurge on insulation. Some weeks, when money was especially tight, we'd scavenge building materials from demolition sites or buy damaged goods at steep discounts. I learned skills I never thought I'd need. Robert taught me how to read blueprints, how to measure twice and cut once, how to tell if a wall was properly leveled. I spent my lunch breaks at the hardware store learning about electrical wiring from old Mr. Henderson, who took pity on us and let me borrow his tools after hours. By Michael's 4th birthday, we had 4 walls and a roof. By his 5th, we had plumbing and electricity. It wasn't fancy. The floors were plywood subflooring, the walls were bare drywall, and we had exactly 3 pieces of furniture. But it was ours. I'll never forget the first night we slept in our own house. Michael was so excited he could barely contain himself, running from room to room, his voice echoing off the empty walls. "It's so big, Mama! It's so big!" Robert and I lay on our mattress on the floor, holding each other and listening to our son's laughter bouncing through the rooms we'd built with our own hands. "We did it, Ellie," Robert whispered. "We actually did it." But we weren't done yet. Over the next 10 years, we slowly transformed that basic structure into a real home. I spent every weekend refinishing hardwood floors that Robert had installed, board by board. I learned to tile bathrooms and paint intricate borders around doorways. We built kitchen cabinets from scratch, installed crown molding, and created a master bedroom suite that felt like a palace compared to where we'd started. Michael grew up swinging hammers and holding flashlights while his dad worked. My happiest memories are of the 3 of us working together on weekend projects. Robert teaching Michael how to use tools properly while I painted trim or organized supplies. "This is how you build something that lasts, son," Robert would tell him, with patience, hard work, and love. When Michael was 12, we finally saved enough to landscape the yard. Together, we planted the rose garden that would become my pride and joy. Michael helped me dig holes for each bush, his small hands dirty, with soil as he carefully positioned each plant exactly where I directed. "Why roses, Mom?" he asked one afternoon as we watered the newly planted garden. "Because they're beautiful, but they're also tough," I told him. "They can survive harsh winters and still bloom again in spring. Just like our family." By the time Michael turned 16, our house was featured in the Maplewood Heights community newsletter as an example of determination and the American dream. People would drive by just to admire what we'd accomplished. Real estate agents started using our property as a comparison point for other homes in the area. We'd increased the value of that $8,000 plot of land to over $200,000 through pure sweat equity. Every improvement, every upgrade, every beautiful detail had been earned through sacrifice and hard work. But more than the money, that house represented something irreplaceable. It was the physical manifestation of our family's love and determination. Every board, every nail, every carefully chosen paint color told the story of who we were and what we'd overcome together. When Robert died suddenly of a heart attack in Michael's junior year of high school, I thought our story was over. How could I maintain this beautiful home we'd built together? How could I afford the property taxes and maintenance on my secretary's salary? but giving up wasn't an option. This house wasn't just our shelter, it was our legacy. It was the promise I'd made to baby Michael all those years ago. It was the last gift Robert had given his son, so I fought for it. I worked 3 jobs and lived on crackers and tea just to keep the lights on. I learned to fix leaky faucets and patch roof shingles myself because I couldn't afford repairmen. Every sacrifice was worth it because I was protecting something precious. The home where my son had learned to walk, learned to ride a bike, learned what it meant to be part of a family that never gives up. I thought Michael understood that. I thought he knew that every brick in those walls represented a choice his parents had made to put his future above their own comfort. I was wrong, and that's what made his betrayal so devastating. He wasn't just kicking me out of a house. He was destroying everything his father and I had built for him. The summer Michael turned 18 was when everything finally came together. After 17 years of constant work, sacrifice, and dreams deferred, our house on Willowbrook Lane was finally complete. Not just livable, truly finished, exactly the way Robert and I had envisioned it all those years ago when we were sketching plans in the dirt. I remember standing in the front yard that June morning, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint our home in golden light. The wraparound porch we'd added the previous year gleamed with fresh white paint. The climbing roses I'd trained up the support columns were in full bloom, their deep red petals catching the early morning breeze. The copper mailbox Robert had crafted by hand during his lunch breaks bore our family name in elegant script, the Hartwells. This wasn't just a house anymore. This was our estate, our legacy, our proof to the world that 2 people with nothing, but love and determination could build something magnificent. The transformation had been gradual but remarkable. What started as a basic 4-room structure had evolved into a stunning 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home with custom features that would have cost a fortune if we'd hired professionals. The hand-carved crown molding in the living room, the built-in bookcases in the study, the elegant bay window in the master bedroom. Every detail had been crafted with love and installed with our own hands. But it was more than just the physical improvements. The house had become the heart of our community. Michael's friends loved gathering there after school, sprawling across the comfortable furniture in our family room, raiding the kitchen I always kept stocked with homemade cookies and fresh fruit. Their parents often commented on how welcoming and warm our home felt, how it had that special quality that made everyone feel like family. "Your house has such good energy, Mrs. Hartwell," said Rebecca Martinez, one of Michael's classmates, as she helped me set the table for one of our regular Sunday dinners. "It feels like love, you know? Like the walls themselves are happy." Those words meant more to me than any compliment about our decorating or craftsmanship. Because that's exactly what Robert and I had wanted to create. A home where love lived in every corner, where memories were made and treasured, where anyone who walked through our door felt the warmth of genuine hospitality. Michael's graduation party that spring was the culmination of everything we'd worked toward. Nearly 100 people filled our backyard, spilling across the manicured lawn where Robert and I had once struggled to grow grass in the rocky soil. The garden beds overflowed with the perennials I'd carefully cultivated over the years: lavender, peonies, black-eyed Susans, and of course, my prize-winning roses that had become famous throughout Maplewood Heights. I watched from the kitchen window as Michael moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and hugs from neighbors, teachers, and friends. He was heading to Riverside University in the fall on a partial engineering scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but combined with the college fund I'd been contributing to for years, it would be enough. He looked so handsome in his cap and gown, so confident and proud. "You did it, Ellie," said my neighbor, Patricia Chen, as she helped me arrange platters of food on the kitchen island. "Look at him out there. Look at this beautiful home you've created. Robert would be so proud." Tears pricked my eyes as I watched Michael throw his head back and laugh at something his friend Jake had said. Yes, Robert would have been proud. Of Michael, of the home we'd built, of the life we'd created together even after losing him too soon. The house had been featured in the local newspaper that month as part of their American Dream series. The reporter, a young woman named Amanda Foster, had spent an entire afternoon photographing our home and interviewing me about our journey from that empty lot to this magnificent property. What makes this story so remarkable, she'd written in her article, isn't just the physical transformation of the property, but the way Eleanor Hartwell has created something that embodies the best of family values and community spirit. This home stands as a testament to what's possible when love and hard work combine with unwavering determination. The article had brought visitors from all over the county. Young couples starting their own building projects came seeking advice. Real estate agents brought potential buyers through the neighborhood just to show them what was possible with vision and dedication. Our house had become a symbol of hope and achievement in Maplewood Heights. More importantly, it had become exactly what I'd dreamed of when I held baby Michael in that cramped apartment above the pizza shop. A place where my son could feel proud, where he could bring friends and future girlfriends without embarrassment, where he could always find safety and unconditional love. The summer before he left for college was magical. With the major construction finally complete, we could focus on simply enjoying what we'd built. Michael and I spent long evenings on the front porch, talking about his plans for university, his dreams of becoming a civil engineer like his father had always wanted to be. "I want to build things that matter, Mom," he told me one humid August night as we watched fireflies dance across our lawn. "Important things, like hospitals and schools. Things that help people." "You will, sweetheart," I assured him, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "You have your father's gift for building and your own heart for helping others. You're going to do incredible things." Sometimes he'd bring out his guitar and play songs he'd learned, his voice floating across the neighborhood as darkness settled around us. Neighbors would often stop their evening walks just to listen, some calling out requests or compliments. Mrs. Patterson from down the street regularly brought her lawn chair to sit at the edge of our property line, claiming our concerts were better than anything on the radio. The house had become more than our home. It was a gathering place, a landmark, a source of joy for our entire community. Children rode their bikes past just to admire the garden. Elderly neighbors stopped by to chat and admire the seasonal decorations I changed with loving care throughout the year. When the first real estate appraiser came through that fall, just for insurance purposes, I'd told Michael, he whistled low under his breath as he examined our custom work. "Ma'am, this property is worth at least $400,000, he said, shaking his head in amazement. "The craftsmanship, the location, the condition, it's exceptional. You've created something truly special here." $400,000. From an $8,000 plot of bare land to nearly $500,000 in value. But more than the money, we'd created something priceless, a home filled with love, memories, and the kind of warmth that can't be bought or sold. Michael's last night before leaving for Riverside University, we sat in the family room surrounded by boxes and suitcases, eating ice cream directly from the carton and looking through photo albums that chronicled our journey. Pictures of him, as a toddler in his little hard hat, pretending to help with construction. Photos of family barbecues in the backyard before we had proper landscaping, when folding tables and mismatched lawn chairs were scattered across patchy grass and bare dirt. "Thank you, Mom," he said suddenly, setting down his spoon and looking around the room with new eyes, "for all of this. For never giving up, even when Dad died and everything seemed impossible. For making sure I had a real home to grow up in." I felt my heart swell with pride and love so intense it almost hurt. This was the moment I'd been working toward for 18 years, seeing my son recognize and appreciate what we'd built together, understanding that this house represented far more than shelter or investment or property value. "It was all for you, baby," I told him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead the way I had when he was small. "Every nail, every board, every late night and early morning. It was all so you'd have something solid to stand on, something beautiful to come home to." As I tucked him into his childhood bed one last time before college, I felt a deep satisfaction settle in my chest. We'd done it. Against all odds, through tragedy and hardship and financial struggles that would have broken many families, we'd created something magnificent. Our house on Willowbrook Lane stood as proof that love really could move mountains, that determination and sacrifice really could build dreams into reality. I thought this was our happy ending. I thought the hard part was over, that from now on, our beautiful home would simply be the setting for graduations and holidays, future weddings and grandchildren's visits. I thought Michael understood that this house was his inheritance, his foundation, his launching pad into whatever future he chose to build. I never imagined that success could be more dangerous than struggle, that prosperity could breed the kind of entitlement that would eventually threaten everything we'd worked so hard to create. The 4 years while Michael was at Riverside University were some of the happiest of my life. With the house finally complete and my son pursuing his dreams, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in decades. The constant financial pressure had eased, the construction dust had settled, and I had a beautiful home to enjoy and a successful young man to be proud of. Michael came home every few weeks, sometimes bringing classmates who marveled at our property. I loved those weekends when the house would fill with laughter again, when young voices echoed through the halls and I could cook for a crowd. His friends always raved about my Sunday roasts and homemade apple pies, and more than one told me they wished their own families had a gathering place like ours. "Your mom is amazing, Mike," I overheard his roommate Trevor say one October weekend. "This place feels like something out of a movie. So warm and welcoming. My parents live in a McMansion that costs 3 times what this is worth, but it feels like a hotel. This feels like a real home." Those words warmed my heart more than any compliment about the crown molding or the landscaping. Because that's exactly what Robert and I had set out to create. Not just a showcase, but a sanctuary where people felt genuinely welcomed and loved. During Michael's sophomore year, I started a tradition that became legendary among his circle of friends. Every month, I'd host what I called Hartwell Family Dinners, elaborate Sunday feasts where Michael could invite anyone from school who couldn't make it home for the weekend. Word spread quickly, and soon I was regularly cooking for 12 to 15 college students who treated our dining room like their own personal restaurant. I didn't mind the extra work. In fact, I loved it. These young people brought such energy and joy into the house. They'd help with dishes, play board games late into the evening, and sometimes even pitch in with small maintenance projects around the property. It felt like I was mothering not just Michael, but an entire extended family of bright, ambitious young adults. "Mrs. H, you're like everyone's fantasy mom," laughed Sarah Beth Connolly, a sweet architecture student who became one of my regular visitors. "Half the girls in our dorm are jealous that Michael gets to come home to this every weekend. You've created something really special here." The house during those years was always alive with activity. Michael's engineering study groups met in our spacious living room, spreading blueprints and calculations across the coffee table Robert had built from reclaimed barnwood. The kitchen island became command central for group projects, term papers, and exam preparation. I'd keep the coffee pot running and the cookie jar full, quietly supporting their academic endeavors from the background. One of my favorite traditions developed during Michael's junior year. Every semester, after finals were over, he'd host what the students dubbed Hartwell Haven celebrations, weekend-long parties where his entire social circle would descend on our property for games, barbecues, and general relaxation after the stress of exams. I'd wake up those Saturday mornings to find sleeping bags scattered across the family room, students curled up on couches and air mattresses, the house filled with the peaceful breathing of young people getting their first real rest in weeks. It reminded me of when Michael was little and would have sleepovers, except now these kids were budding engineers, architects, teachers, and doctors. "You know what I love most about coming here?" Michael told me one evening as we cleaned up after one of these celebrations. "It's not just the house, Mom, though obviously it's beautiful. It's the feeling. You've made this place into something that makes people want to be better versions of themselves. Everyone feels important here, valued, listened to. During his senior year, Michael started bringing home a special someone, a lovely girl named Jessica Walsh from his structural engineering program. She was nothing like the wealthy, entitled girls I'd worried he might fall for at university. Jessica came from a working-class family in Blue Ridge County, and she understood the value of hard work and sacrifice. The first time she visited, she spent an hour in my garden, asking detailed questions about soil composition and pruning techniques. "My grandmother had roses like these," she said, gently touching the petals of my prize-winning David Austin varieties. "She always said they were like friendship. They need attention and care, but they reward you with beauty for years." I knew immediately that this was a girl who would appreciate what we'd built here. Jessica fit seamlessly into our family traditions. She helped with the monthly dinners, contributed her own recipe for cornbread that became an instant hit, and even joined me for early morning coffee sessions in the garden when she stayed over. Unlike some of Michael's previous girlfriends who seemed intimidated by our close relationship, Jessica embraced it. "I love watching you two together," she told me one spring morning as we planted new annuals in the front flower beds. "My mom died when I was 12, and seeing the relationship you and Michael have gives me hope that I can have something like that with my own children someday." The house became Jessica's second home during that final year of college. She'd arrive on Friday afternoons, kick off her shoes at the front door, and immediately start helping with whatever project I had going. She learned to cook several of my signature dishes, mastered my technique for arranging flowers from the garden, and even helped me reorganize the basement storage areas that had accumulated years of holiday decorations and keepsakes. More importantly, she understood the stories behind everything in our home. She'd listen with genuine interest as I explained how Robert and I had salvaged the heart pine floors from an old tobacco warehouse, or how we'd designed the built-in window seat in the breakfast nook specifically to catch the morning light. She appreciated the history embedded in every corner of our house. Michael's graduation from Riverside University was another milestone celebration held at our home. The backyard was filled with folding tables covered in my grandmother's white, lace tablecloths, laden with food prepared by family friends who insisted on contributing to the feast. Professor Williams, Michael's favorite instructor, made a special trip just to see the house he'd heard so much about. "Michael talks about this place constantly," the professor told me as I gave him a tour of the property. "He says you taught him more about engineering principles through building this house than most students learn in 4 years of classroom instruction. The craftsmanship is remarkable for amateur construction." That evening, as the last guests departed and we sat on the front porch swing Robert had installed during our second year of construction, Michael put his arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. "I want you to know something, Mom," he said, his voice serious in the gathering dusk. "Whatever I accomplish in my career, wherever life takes me, this house will always be my anchor. You gave me something money can't buy. A foundation of love and security that I'll carry with me forever." Jessica nodded from her spot on the porch steps. "We both want that for our own family someday, a place where children can grow up feeling completely safe and loved, where friends always feel welcome, where traditions matter more than trends." I felt tears prick my eyes as I looked out over the property we'd transformed from bare land into this beautiful estate. The sunset painted everything in golden light. The wraparound porch, the mature oak trees, the flower gardens bursting with color, the rolling lawn where Michael had learned to ride his bike and throw a baseball. This was exactly the dream Robert and I had shared all those years ago. Not just a house, but a legacy. A place where our son had grown into a man of character and integrity, where love had multiplied and spread to touch the lives of everyone who walked through our door. As Michael and Jessica made plans for their post-graduation life, he'd accepted a position with Morrison Engineering in downtown Riverside, and she'd be working for the county planning department. I felt complete satisfaction with what we'd accomplished. They talked about saving money for their own house down payment, Maybe finding something in the Willowbrook neighborhood so they could stay close to family? We want to build something like this, Jessica said, gesturing toward our home with obvious admiration. Maybe not as grand, but with the same heart, the same feeling of warmth and welcome. Those summer evenings were pure magic. Michael was home from college for the last time as a student, successful and happy, with a wonderful girlfriend who understood and appreciated our values. The house was filled with laughter, plans for the future, and the deep contentment that comes from knowing you've done your job well as a parent. I thought this was how things would always be. Regular visits, holiday celebrations, eventually grandchildren playing in the same backyard where their father had learned to walk. I imagined Jessica and me working in the garden together while our grandchildren napped in the shade of the oak trees. I pictured family dinners in our beautiful dining room for decades to come, the table expanding to accommodate new spouses, babies in high chairs, and all the joyful chaos of a growing family. I had no idea that within 2 years, everything would change. That the sweet, appreciative girl who helped me plant flowers and set tables would disappear, replaced by someone I barely recognized. That the son who called this house his anchor would try to cut me loose from everything I'd worked my entire life to build. The change began so subtly that at first I convinced myself I was imagining things. It started about 6 months after Michael and Jessica's wedding, a beautiful ceremony we'd held right here in our backyard under the ancient oak trees, with fairy lights strung between the branches and Jessica's grandmother's roses providing the perfect backdrop. The wedding had been everything I'd dreamed of for my son. Intimate, meaningful, filled with the people who truly mattered to our family. Jessica had insisted on using my china for the reception dinner, and she'd worn my grandmother's pearl necklace as her something borrowed. She'd tearfully thanked me in her wedding speech for welcoming her into the most loving family she'd ever known. But something shifted after they returned from their honeymoon in Asheville. It started with small comments that felt like tiny paper cuts, barely noticeable individually, but they began to accumulate. Jessica would walk through the house with a different expression now, not the wonder and appreciation she'd shown during college, but something more. Analytical. Critical, even. "You know, Eleanor," she said one Sunday afternoon as we cleaned up after dinner, "this wallpaper in the dining room is very period-specific, isn't it?" She ran her fingers along the William Morris pattern I'd chosen so carefully 15 years earlier, the one that had been featured in that home decorating magazine article about timeless elegance. "I suppose it is," I replied, not sure what she was getting at. "Robert and I chose it because we wanted something classic that wouldn't go out of style." She murmured, but her tone suggested she disagreed with our assessment. A few weeks later, it was the furniture. "These pieces are quite substantial, aren't they?" she commented, referring to the solid oak dining set that Robert had built by hand during Michael's middle school years. Each chair had been carefully crafted with mortise and tenon joints that would last for generations. The table could easily seat 12 people and had hosted countless family celebrations. "Robert made every piece himself," I said proudly. "He wanted furniture that would be here for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren." Jessica smiled tightly. "How rustic." Rustic. The word stung more than it should have. This wasn't rustic furniture. It was fine craftsmanship, created with skill and love by a man who understood that quality meant building things to last. But I bit my tongue, telling myself that Jessica was still adjusting to married life, still finding her place in our family dynamic. The real shift became apparent during their first Christmas as a married couple. They'd moved into a modern apartment in Riverside after the wedding, but they spent the holidays at our house as we'd always done. I'd decorated with the same care as always, fresh garland on the banisters, handmade ornaments collected over decades, twinkling lights in every window. Jessica walked through the house that Christmas Eve, her phone in hand, taking pictures. At first, I thought she was capturing memories, maybe sharing our beautiful decorations with her family. But I caught a glimpse of her screen and saw she was texting someone. OMG, look at this place. It's like a time warp. So much stuff everywhere. My heart sank. This wasn't appreciation, it was mockery. Michael seemed oblivious to the change in his wife's attitude, or perhaps he was choosing not to notice. When I gently mentioned that Jessica seemed less enthusiastic about family gatherings than she used to be, he brushed off my concerns. She's just tired, Mom. Starting a new job, adjusting to marriage. It's a lot of change. She loves coming here. She always tells me how much she appreciates everything you do for us. But I knew what I was seeing. The warm, grateful young woman who had helped me plant flowers and learned my recipes was disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed to view our home as an obligation rather than a blessing. The criticism became more direct after the new year. Jessica started making suggestions, always framed as helpful observations, but clearly intended to improve our living situation. You know, Eleanor, if you ever wanted to update this kitchen, you could probably get a really good return on investment. These cabinets are so dark and heavy-looking. White shaker-style cabinets would make the space feel so much more open and modern. I stared at the cabinets Robert and I had designed together, the ones we'd built and installed during evenings and weekends when Michael was in elementary school. They were solid maple, stained a rich honey color that complemented the heart pine floors perfectly. They weren't just functional. They were part of our home's story. I like them the way they are, I said quietly. Of course, Jessica replied with that same tight smile. I just thought, well, if you ever wanted to increase the property value, as if our home was just an investment to be optimized rather than a sanctuary filled with memories. Then came the comments about our lifestyle. Jessica began making subtle digs about how we did things, always comparing our traditions unfavorably to what she called modern approaches. Do you really need to cook such elaborate Sunday dinners every week? She asked one February afternoon as I prepared my usual feast for the family. It seems like so much work. Most people just order takeout or keep things simple these days. I enjoy cooking for my family, I replied, seasoning the roast with the herb blend I'd been perfecting for 20 years. These dinners are important to me. They're how we stay connected. But it's so much pressure on you, she persisted. And honestly, all this heavy food isn't great for anyone's health. Michael and I have been trying to eat more mindfully. You know, cleaner, lighter meals. I watched her scroll through her phone while making these pronouncements, not even looking at the meal I was preparing with love and care. This was the same woman who had once begged me to teach her my mother's cornbread recipe, who had praised my cooking skills to anyone who would listen. Michael, when he was present for these conversations, would make weak attempts to mediate. Jess is just health-conscious, Mom. She's not criticizing your cooking. But it felt like criticism. It felt like dismissal of everything I valued, everything I'd worked to create. The real wake-up call came during Easter weekend. Jessica's mother, Patricia Blackwood, came to visit for the first time. I should have recognized the name. The Blackwoods owned half the commercial real estate in Thornfield, the wealthy district across town. Patricia arrived in a silver Mercedes, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly budget, her demeanor suggesting she was doing us a tremendous favor by gracing our humble home with her presence. What a quaint neighborhood, she said, surveying our street with barely concealed disdain. Very established. Established. Another word that somehow sounded like an insult when applied to our beautiful, mature community. During dinner, Patricia held court with stories about the Blackwood family properties, their estate in Thornfield with the infinity pool and wine cellar, their vacation home in the Hamptons, their latest renovation project that had been featured in Architectural Digest. Of course, we believe in investing in quality, she said, gesturing vaguely at our dining room. When you buy the best the first time, you never have to settle for Compromises. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. Compromises? This house represented 30 years of careful planning, skilled craftsmanship, and unwavering love. Every compromise we'd made had been a choice to prioritize family over flash, substance over status. Jessica sat beside her mother, nodding along with every subtle insult, contributing her own observations about potential and opportunities for improvement. Gone was any pretense of appreciating what we'd built. In front of her mother, she felt free to express her true feelings about our home, our lifestyle, our values. Michael sat at the head of the table his father had built with his own hands, and said nothing. He didn't defend our home or our choices. He didn't speak up when his mother-in-law implied that our beautiful property was somehow deficient. He just smiled uncomfortably and changed the subject. That night, after our guests had gone to bed, I sat alone in my kitchen feeling more isolated than I had since Robert's death. The house that had always been my sanctuary suddenly felt like a stage where I was being judged and found wanting by people who couldn't begin to understand what it represented. I realized that Jessica's transformation hadn't happened overnight. She'd simply revealed her true nature once she felt secure enough in her marriage to drop the pretense. The grateful, appreciative young woman I'd welcomed into our family had been a performance, a mask worn until she no longer needed my approval, and Michael, my son, who had once called this house his anchor, was allowing his wife and mother-in-law to diminish everything we'd built together. He was choosing their approval over our bond, their values over the lessons I'd spent a lifetime teaching him. As I walked through the quiet rooms of our home that night, touching the furniture Robert had made, straightening the photographs that chronicled our family's history, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring weather. Storm clouds were gathering, and I had a terrible feeling that the sanctuary I'd spent 30 years creating was about to become a battlefield. The summer after Patricia's visit marked the beginning of what I can only describe as a systematic campaign to remake my home in Jessica's image. It started with what she called small improvements, changes that seemed reasonable enough individually, but together formed a pattern that made my stomach clench with growing dread. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of having your living room curtains professionally cleaned, Jessica announced one June morning, her voice bright with false cheerfulness. They were looking a bit tired. I stood in my own living room, staring at windows that now looked naked and wrong. The curtains I'd hung there, custom-made from fabric I'd chosen after weeks of careful consideration, were gone. In their place hung stark white panels that looked like they belonged in a doctor's office. "Where are my curtains?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled. "Oh, they're at Prestige Cleaners. But honestly, Eleanor, I think these white ones are so much fresher. They let in more light, make the space feel bigger, don't you think?" No, I didn't think. Those curtains had been a deep forest green that complemented the hand-painted walls perfectly. They'd been part of a carefully coordinated color scheme that had taken me months to plan and execute. But when I tried to explain this, Jessica just smiled and patted my arm. "Trust me, this is so much better. Sometimes we get attached to things just because they're familiar, but that doesn't mean they're actually working." The next week, I came home from grocery shopping to find Jessica in my garden with a landscaping crew. "Surprise!" she called out, gesturing toward my prized rose bushes, the ones Jessica herself had once admired, comparing them to her grandmother's garden. "I'm having these old roses replaced with something more contemporary, ornamental grasses and modern plantings that won't require so much maintenance." I watched in horror as workers loaded my David Austin roses, plants I'd nurtured for 15 years, onto a truck like garbage. These weren't just flowers. They were living memories. Each bush represented a birthday, an anniversary, a celebration. The Queen of Sweden rose had been planted the day Michael graduated high school. The Lady of Shalott had been my gift to myself after receiving my first promotion at the insurance company. "Jessica, stop!" I rushed toward the workers, but she, stepped in my path. Eleanor, I know change is hard, but these roses are diseased. Look at the black spot on the leaves. They're actually hurting the property value. I've researched low-maintenance landscaping that will look clean and modern year-round. Diseased? I knew every leaf, every bloom on those plants. There was minor. Black spot? Yes. But that was normal and manageable. These roses were healthy, productive, and irreplaceable. But the workers continued loading my precious plants while Jessica supervised, consulting a landscape design on her tablet. By evening, my garden looked like a construction site, filled with geometric planters and grasses that belonged in a corporate office complex. "You'll thank me later," Jessica said, surveying the destruction with satisfaction. "This is going to be so much easier to maintain, and it'll photograph beautifully for social media." Social media. That's what my garden had been reduced to, a backdrop for Instagram posts. Michael came home that evening to find me sitting on the front porch, staring at the moonlit wasteland where my roses used to grow. When I tried to explain what had happened, he sighed like I was being difficult. "Mom, Jess was just trying to help. She knows about modern landscaping. It's part of her job with the county planning department. And honestly, those roses were getting pretty demanding. Maybe it's time to try something easier." Easier. Demanding. As if love and care were inconveniences to be eliminated rather than investments that grew more beautiful over time. The takeover accelerated through the summer. Jessica began spending entire days at the house while Michael was at work, ostensibly helping me with various projects. Each time she visited, something else disappeared or changed. My collection of vintage blue and white china vanished from the dining room hutch, replaced by stark white dishes from some trendy home goods store. "These are so much more versatile," Jessica explained. "You can use them for anything, and they won't clash with future decorating choices." Future decorating choices. As if my current choices were temporary inconveniences to be endured until she could implement her real vision. The family photographs that had lined the hallway for 20 years were taken down and stored safely in the guest room closet, while Jessica rehung the walls with abstract art she'd ordered online. "Personal photos are great for bedrooms and private spaces," she informed me, "but in main living areas, you want something more universal. Universal. Generic. Soulless." She replaced my kitchen canisters, hand-painted ceramic pieces I'd collected over the years, with matching stainless steel containers. My comfortable reading chair in the living room disappeared one afternoon, replaced by a sleek modern piece that looked stylish but felt like sitting on a piece of cardboard. "Where's my chair?" I asked when I discovered it missing. "Oh, that old thing? I donated it to Goodwill. This new one is so much better for your posture, and it doesn't dominate." The room visually. That old thing had been my refuge for 15 years. Robert had bought it for me as a birthday gift, and I'd spent countless evenings curled up in it, reading while Michael did homework at the coffee table. Now it was gone, donated like trash, while I was supposed to be grateful for this uncomfortable substitute. But the worst part wasn't the individual changes. It was the way Jessica made each alteration seem like she was doing me a favor. Every theft was disguised as generosity. Every destruction presented as improvement. She had an explanation for everything, a reasonable-sounding justification that made me feel selfish and ungrateful for objecting. "I'm just trying to help you." "Modernize," became her standard response to any resistance. "The house has such good bones, but it needs updating to reach its full potential." Potential. Another word that had become like fingernails on a chalkboard, as if 30 years of love, labor, and careful curation were just obstacles preventing the house from becoming whatever Jessica envisioned it should be. The most insidious part was how she'd enlisted Michael as her unwitting ally. Every evening, he'd come home to find some new improvement and praise Jessica's efforts. "The living room looks so much brighter now," he'd say about the sterile white curtains. And that new landscaping is going to be so much easier to maintain. Jess really has an eye for this stuff. When I tried to express my feelings about these changes, Michael would look at me with a mixture of confusion and impatience. Mom, I don't understand why you're upset. Jessica's working really hard to help improve the house. She's doing this for all of us. No, she wasn't. She was erasing me, piece by piece, room by room. She was systematically removing every trace of the woman who had built this home, replacing my choices with her own aesthetic vision. By August, I felt like a stranger in my own house. The rooms that had once reflected my personality, my history, my love for my family, now looked like something from a home staging magazine. Attractive in a generic way, but devoid of warmth or character. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to Jessica and Michael discuss future projects in their bedroom down the hall. They talked about paint colors and furniture arrangements like they were planning their own home, not temporarily staying in mine. We should really do something about that wallpaper in the dining room, Jessica would say. And those built-in bookcases in the study are so dark and heavy. If we painted them white and maybe added some modern shelving. She said we like this was her house, like I was just another obstacle to overcome in her renovation plans. The breaking point came when I walked into my own study one Tuesday afternoon to find Jessica photographing my bookshelves with her phone, typing notes as she cataloged the contents. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Oh, just getting organized," she said breezily. "Some of these books are really outdated, and others are just taking up space. I thought we could donate the ones you don't actually need and make room for more useful storage." She was inventorying my books like they were excess inventory to be eliminated. These weren't just books. They were my companions, my escapes, my references. Some had been gifts from Robert, others were cookbooks passed down from my mother. Still others were novels that had gotten me through difficult times. "Those are my books," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course they are," Jessica replied with that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "I'm just trying to help you. Organize them better. Some of these paperbacks are practically falling apart, and honestly, when was the last time you read Home Improvement for Beginners from 1987? That book had guided Robert and me through our first major renovation projects. It was full of his handwritten notes in the margins, sketches of solutions he'd devised for problems we'd encountered. It was irreplaceable. But to Jessica, it was just clutter to be eliminated in service of her vision of a perfectly curated, minimalist space where nothing personal or sentimental would interfere with the aesthetic she was creating. Standing in my study, watching her inventory my possessions like an appraiser preparing for an estate sale, I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't about helping or improving or modernizing. This was about possession. Jessica wasn't just redecorating my home. She was claiming it, erasing my presence and replacing it with her own, one improvement at a time. By September, I had become a ghost in my own home, not just because Jessica had systematically erased every trace of my personality from the rooms I'd lovingly decorated, but because I'd started to disappear from the daily life of the house as well. Every space that had once been mine now felt like territory I was trespassing on. The kitchen, which had been the heart of our home for 30 years, became the most painful example. Jessica had taken over meal planning and preparation, claiming she wanted to give me a break from all that cooking. But her version of cooking bore no resemblance to the loving preparation of family meals that had defined my relationship with that room. Instead of my slow-simmered Sunday roasts and homemade bread that filled the house with warmth and comfort, Jessica prepared what she called clean eating: quinoa salads, smoothie bowls, and steamed vegetables that she photographed extensively for her social media before anyone was allowed to eat. "Eleanor, you should really try this," she'd say, placing a bowl of something green and unfamiliar in front of me. "It's a superfood blend that's so much better for inflammation than all that heavy comfort food you used to make." Used to make. as if my decades of nurturing my family through food were just a phase I'd grown out of, rather than a tradition that had been forcibly ended. Michael would eat these meals dutifully, sometimes glancing wistfully at the empty spot on the counter where my bread maker used to live before Jessica donated it to declutter the workspace. But he never asked for the pot roasts or apple pies that had once been his favorites. He seemed to have forgotten they ever existed. The dining room, where we'd shared thousands of family meals around the table Robert built, now served as Jessica's home office. She'd moved in a glass desk and ergonomic chair, claiming she needed a quiet space to work on her county planning projects. The beautiful oak table was pushed against the wall, covered with a protective cloth and used as storage for Jessica's boxes of files and office supplies. "It's just temporary," she assured me when I found her setting up her computer where my grandmother's china cabinet used to stand. "But this room has such good natural light for productivity, and honestly, how often do you really need a formal dining room?" Never, apparently, because family dinners now happened at the kitchen island, quick utilitarian affairs where Jessica scrolled through her phone while Michael discussed his workday, and I sat quietly, afraid to contribute to conversations that increasingly felt like they were happening around me rather than with me. The living room had become Jessica's entertainment center. She'd mounted an enormous flat-screen television on the wall where Robert's landscape paintings used to hang, and filled the space with sleek, uncomfortable furniture that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. She controlled the remote, the music, the conversation topics. "You don't mind if we skip that old movie tonight, do you, Eleanor?" she'd say, not waiting for an answer before switching to whatever reality show she was currently obsessed with. This is so much more relevant and engaging. I'd retreat to what remained of my private spaces, my bedroom and the guest bathroom. But even those sanctuaries felt temporary, like Jessica was simply waiting for the right moment to transform them too. The worst part was how invisible I'd become in conversations about the house itself. Jessica and Michael would stand in rooms discussing future improvements, as if I wasn't there, making plans for changes that would eliminate the last traces of the home Robert and I had built. "What do you think about opening up this wall between the kitchen and living room?" Jessica asked Michael one evening, tapping on the load-bearing wall that separated the two spaces. "It would create such better flow and make everything feel more modern." That wall contained the electrical work Robert had spent weeks perfecting, routing power to the built-in cabinets he'd designed specifically for that space. Removing it would destroy not just the structure, but the careful craftsmanship he'd put into every detail. "Sounds like it could be expensive," Michael replied. "But if you think it would add value..." Add value. Everything in my home was now evaluated solely on its potential to increase resale value, as if we were preparing to sell rather than planning to live here for decades to come. "I've been researching contractors," Jessica continued, pulling up photos on her tablet. "And look at these before and after pictures from similar projects. The difference is incredible." She showed him images of houses that had been gutted and rebuilt to look like every other modern home. Open concept spaces with white walls, gray floors, and absolutely no character or warmth. Houses that could have been anywhere, designed by anyone, containing no trace of the families who lived in them. "We could really maximize the potential of this space," she said, her eyes bright with the vision of destroying everything Robert and I had created. Michael nodded enthusiastically, caught up in her excitement about erasing his childhood home. "Yeah, I can see how that would work. Maybe we should get some estimates." Estimates. They were seriously planning to tear down walls that held 30 years of my memories, to eliminate the careful room divisions that had made our house feel like a real home rather than a warehouse. I tried to speak up, to explain why those walls mattered, why the layout worked perfectly for family life, why destroying Robert's craftsmanship would be like desecrating a work of art. But Jessica had a response. For every objection, "Oh, Eleanor, I know change is scary, but you have to trust the process. This house has so much potential that's being wasted by outdated design choices. We're not destroying anything. We're enhancing what's already here. Enhancing. By eliminating everything that made it special. Michael would nod along with these explanations, sometimes even adding his own comments about how progressive and smart Jessica's ideas were. My own son had become a stranger, someone who valued his wife's opinions over the history of his own childhood home. The isolation deepened when Jessica began making decisions without even the pretense of consulting me. I'd come home from errands to find workers in the house, making changes I hadn't been informed about, following instructions Jessica had given them without mentioning her plans to me. "Oh, that," she'd say when I asked about the men installing new light fixtures in the hallway. "I thought those old chandeliers were looking dated, so I had them updated with something more contemporary. Don't worry, I got a great deal on these new ones." Those old chandeliers had been crystal fixtures Robert and I had saved for months to buy, chosen to complement the crown molding and add elegance to our home's main corridor. Now they were gone, replaced with stark LED panels that made the hallway look like a medical facility. But the most devastating moment came when I realized that Jessica and Michael had been having secret meetings about the house's future. Conversations. That happened when I wasn't around, planning sessions that deliberately excluded me from decisions about my own property. I discovered this accidentally when I returned early from a doctor's appointment and overheard them in the study, speaking in low voices about timelines and project phases. "If we start with the kitchen renovation this winter, we could have the whole first floor done by summer," Jessica was saying. "Then we tackle the upstairs bathrooms and maybe add that master suite extension we talked about." Master suite extension? They were planning to add onto my house without even mentioning it to me? "What about Mom?" Michael asked. And for a moment my heart lifted, thinking he was finally considering my feelings. "Oh, she'll come around once she sees how much better everything looks," Jessica replied dismissively. "She's just attached to old things because they're familiar. Once she experiences modern living, she'll wonder why she waited so long to update." Modern living. As if the way I'd chosen to live for 30 years was somehow primitive or wrong. And, honestly, Jessica continued, at her age, she should be grateful that we're taking care of all these decisions for her. It's a lot of stress and responsibility. At my age, I was 58 years old, not some elderly invalid who needed caretakers making decisions on my behalf. Standing outside my own study, listening to my son and daughter-in-law plan the destruction of everything I'd worked my entire adult life to create, I felt a loneliness so profound it was physically painful. They weren't just excluding me from conversations. They were excluding me from my own life, treating me like an obstacle to overcome, rather than the woman who had made their comfortable existence possible. That night, I lay in bed listening to them continue their planning in whispered conversations down the hall, making lists of contractors and discussing budgets for renovations I didn't want and hadn't approved. I realized that I had become completely powerless in my own home, reduced to a silent observer of my life's work being systematically dismantled by people who saw my 3 decades of love and labor as nothing more than outdated impediments to their vision of modern perfection. The isolation was complete. I was alone in a house full of people, invisible in rooms I had built with my own hands, unwanted in the home that was supposed to be my sanctuary until the day I died. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. I woke to the sound of rain pattering against my bedroom window, the same gentle rhythm that had lulled me to sleep in this room for 30 years. But when I walked downstairs to make my morning coffee, I found Michael and Jessica sitting at the kitchen island with a stack of papers between them, their expressions serious and rehearsed. The sight made my stomach clench with immediate dread. This wasn't their usual morning routine of scrolling through phones while drinking Jessica's green smoothies. This was formal, planned, deliberate. "Mom," Michael said, his voice strangely flat, "we need to talk." Those 4 words, the same ones, that had preceded every difficult conversation we'd ever had, made my hands tremble as I reached for my coffee mug. The mug Jessica had allowed me to keep, one of the few remnants of my former kitchen that had survived her purge. "Sit down, Eleanor," Jessica said, gesturing to the stool across from them like she was the hostess and I was the guest. Her voice carried that familiar tone of false kindness, the one she used when she was about to deliver something unpleasant while pretending it was for my own good. I sat, my heart hammering against my ribs, knowing instinctively that whatever was coming would be devastating. Michael cleared his throat and looked down at the papers, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom, Jessica and I have been doing a lot of thinking about our living situation here. Our living situation. As if this house was a temporary arrangement we'd all stumbled into, rather than my home that I'd graciously opened to them." "We love being here," Jessica added quickly, her smile sharp as broken glass. "But we've realized that this arrangement isn't working for anyone anymore. Not working for anyone." I'd been bending over backward for months to accommodate every change they'd demanded, accepting every improvement they'd forced on my home, swallowing every criticism of my choices and lifestyle. How was that not working? "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. The dread in my stomach was spreading like ice water through my veins. Michael finally looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been guilt, but was quickly replaced by determination. "We think it would be best if you found your own place, Mom. Somewhere more appropriate for this stage of your life." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard. My own son, the boy I'd raised in this house, the man I'd sacrificed everything to nurture and educate, was telling me to leave my own home. "My own place?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Now, before you get upset," Jessica interjected, leaning forward with that condescending expression she'd perfected. "This isn't about not wanting you around. It's about what's healthy for everyone involved." Healthy. As if my presence in my own home was some kind of disease that needed to be cured. "Michael and I are newlyweds," she continued, her hand moving to rest possessively on his arm. "We need space to build our marriage, to establish our own family traditions. And honestly, Eleanor, you deserve your own independence too. You've spent your whole adult life taking care of other people. Don't you think it's time you focused on yourself?" The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. She was framing my eviction as a gift, as liberation, as something I should be grateful for. "This is my house," I said quietly, the words feeling strange in my mouth. How many times in 30 years had I needed to say that sentence? Never. Because it had never been questioned before. Jessica's laugh was like the sound of glass breaking. "Oh, Eleanor, I think there might be some confusion about that." She reached for one of the papers on the counter and slid it toward me. My hands shook as I picked it up, trying to focus on the legal language that swam before my eyes. "You see," Jessica continued, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "When Robert died, this house was transferred to Michael as the surviving heir. You've been living here as his guest all these years." Guest. The word made my vision blur with rage and shock. I'd been a guest in the house I'd built with my own hands, the house I'd nearly killed myself working 3 jobs to maintain after Robert's death. "That's not—" I started, but Jessica held up a manicured hand to stop me. "I know it's confusing, especially since you've been handling the maintenance and utilities, but legally, Michael has been the owner for years now. We've just been too polite to mention it because we didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable." Too polite. They were claiming that years of letting me believe this was my home had been an act of kindness, rather than a lie that had allowed them to manipulate me into accepting their systematic destruction of everything I'd loved. "Michael?" I turned to my son, desperate for him to correct this obvious lie, to tell Jessica she was wrong, to remember that this house was mine. "Tell her this isn't true." but Michael wouldn't look at me. He stared down at his hands, his shoulders hunched, like a guilty child. Mom, the paperwork is all there. When Dad died, the house automatically transferred to me. I thought you knew. Thought I knew. How could I know something that wasn't true? I'd been paying the property taxes every year, maintaining the insurance, making decisions about repairs and improvements. You don't do those things for someone else's property. Besides, Jessica added, shuffling through more papers, we've already found you the perfect place. Sunset Manor is a lovely senior community just 20 minutes away. Independent living, but with support services if you need them. So much easier than trying to maintain this big house all by yourself. Senior community. At 58 years old, they were trying to ship me off to a retirement home like I was some elderly burden who couldn't take care of herself. I don't want to live in a senior community, I said, my voice growing stronger with anger. I want to live in my home. The home I built. The home I've maintained and improved and loved for 30 years. Eleanor, Jessica's voice took on that maddening patience again. You have to be realistic. This house is too big for one person, too expensive to maintain on a fixed income. And frankly, it's not fair to expect Michael to subsidize your lifestyle. Forever. Subsidize my lifestyle? I'd been supporting myself just fine, thank you very much. My insurance job provided a decent salary, and I'd been managing the household expenses without any help from Michael since he'd moved back in. We're not trying to be cruel, Michael said, finally meeting my eyes. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. You'll be happier in a place designed for people your age, with activities and social opportunities, and Jessica and I can start our real life together. Real life. As if the months they'd spent systematically destroying my home and isolating me from my own family had been some kind of rehearsal. What if I refuse? I asked, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Jessica's smile turned predatory. Well, that would be unfortunate, but since Michael is the legal owner, he has the right to decide who lives here. We've already given you 30 days' notice to make arrangements. 30 days. They'd planned this, prepared the paperwork, found me a place to live, and decided my entire future without involving me in any of the discussions. I was being evicted from my own life by people I'd trusted and loved and sacrificed everything for. I've already put a deposit down at Sunset Manor, Jessica continued, pulling out a brochure featuring smiling elderly people playing shuffleboard and eating in a communal dining room. It's really quite nice. Housekeeping included, meals, provided if you want them, transportation to shopping and medical appointments. Much less stressful than trying to manage all these responsibilities yourself. She was describing a prison with amenities, a place where I'd be managed and supervised and entertained like a child, where every trace of the independence and dignity I'd fought my whole life to maintain would be stripped away. Michael, I said one last time, putting all the love and desperation I felt into his name. Please. This is the house where you learned to walk, where your father taught you to use tools, where we celebrated every birthday and holiday of your childhood. How can you just throw me out? For a moment, something flickered across his face. Maybe guilt, maybe memory, maybe a ghost of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But then Jessica squeezed his arm, and whatever humanity I'd glimpsed disappeared. Mom, you're being dramatic. We're not throwing you out. We're helping you transition to the next phase of your life. Sunset Manor has a great reputation, and you'll make new friends there. It'll be good for you. Good for me. Being exiled from my own home, losing every possession that connected me to my late husband and my son's childhood, being warehoused with strangers in a facility designed to manage the elderly, all of this was supposedly for my benefit. I looked around the kitchen where I'd fed my family for 3 decades, where I'd packed Michael's school lunches and nursed him through illness and celebrated his achievements. In a month, it would belong entirely to Jessica, who would probably gut it completely and install whatever sterile modern monstrosity she'd been planning. I need some time to think, I said, standing on shaking legs. Of course, Jessica said, graciously, as if she were granting me a tremendous favor instead of 30 days to dismantle my entire life. Take all the time you need, but remember, the deposit at Sunset Manor is non-refundable, so we'll need to finalize the arrangements. Soon. I walked toward the stairs, feeling like I was moving through water, my legs heavy and unsteady. Behind me, I could hear Jessica's voice, bright and cheerful, already discussing plans for redecorating their kitchen. In my bedroom, the room where Robert and I had planned our dreams, where I'd rocked Michael to sleep as a baby, where I'd cried and hoped and loved for 30 years. I sank onto the bed and stared at the legal papers in my hands. But as I read through the documents more carefully, something began to dawn on me. Something Jessica and Michael had overlooked in their rush to claim ownership of my life. Something that was about to change everything. I sat on my bed for what felt like hours, reading and rereading the documents Jessica had so confidently presented as proof of my homelessness. My hands trembled as I studied each page, looking for something, anything, that might contradict the devastating reality they'd laid out before me. The papers seemed legitimate enough at first glance. There was indeed a deed transfer document, dated shortly after Robert's death, transferring the property from Robert James Hartwell to Michael Robert Hartwell. My name appeared nowhere on the document, but something nagged at me as I studied the paperwork more carefully. Something about the dates, the signatures, the legal language that felt wrong. Not obviously fraudulent, but incomplete somehow, like I was only seeing part of a larger story. That's when I remembered the fireproof safe. My heart began to pound as I knelt beside my bed and pulled out the heavy metal box Robert had insisted we buy during our second year in the house. Important documents need proper protection, Ellie, he'd said, carefully organizing our marriage certificate, birth certificates, and insurance policies inside the secure container. I hadn't opened it in years, not since adding Michael's college diploma to the collection. But now, as I turned the combination lock with fingers that shook with hope and desperation, I prayed that my memory was correct about what else was stored inside. The safe opened with a satisfying click, and there, beneath a stack of insurance papers and old tax returns, I found what I was looking for: the original property deed from 1991, the mortgage documents, and most importantly, a folder labeled Estate Planning in Robert's careful handwriting. My breath caught as I pulled out the will, Robert's last will, and testament, properly witnessed and notarized, dated just 6 months before his death. I'd been so devastated by my grief that I'd barely paid attention to the legal proceedings afterward, trusting that everything had been handled correctly by the estate attorney. But as I read through the document now, my hands shaking with growing excitement, I discovered something that Jessica and Michael either didn't know about or had deliberately chosen to ignore. The house hadn't been transferred to Michael automatically upon Robert's death. According to the will, the property had been left to me, Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, with a specific provision that Michael would inherit it only upon my death, or if I chose to transfer it to him voluntarily while I was still alive. More importantly, there was a second document I'd completely forgotten about. A quitclaim deed Robert had insisted we file just months before his death, officially adding my name to the property title as joint owner with rights of survivorship. When Robert died, his half of the property had automatically transferred to me, making me the sole legal owner. The document Jessica had shown me wasn't fraudulent, it was simply irrelevant. It appeared to be some kind of administrative filing, possibly related to estate taxes or insurance, but it had no bearing on the actual ownership of the property. I was not a guest in my own home. I was not living here at Michael's sufferance. This house was mine, legally, completely, and indisputably mine. But I was also furious that my own son had either been deceived about the true ownership or had chosen to participate in what amounted to an elaborate fraud designed to steal my home from me. My hands were steadier now as I gathered all the documents from the safe, organizing them in chronological order to tell the complete story of the property's ownership. The original purchase documents from 1991, showing Robert and me as joint buyers. The mortgage papers we'd both signed. The quitclaim deed from months before Robert's death. His will, clearly stating his intentions. And finally, the death certificate and subsequent legal documents confirming my sole ownership of the property. It was all there, black and white, undeniable proof that everything Jessica had told me was either a deliberate lie or a catastrophic misunderstanding of the legal facts. I thought about marching downstairs immediately to confront them with the truth, to watch Jessica's confident smirk dissolve when she realized she'd overplayed her hand. But something held me back, a cold, calculating fury that demanded a more thoughtful response than immediate confrontation. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would give me unbiased legal advice, Margaret Williamson, the estate attorney who had handled Robert's will and who had known our family for decades. "Eleanor!" Margaret's warm voice was like a lifeline. "How lovely to hear from you. How are you managing, dear?" "I need your help, Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have some questions about Robert's estate and the house." "Of course. Is everything all right?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The documents Jessica had presented, the claims about Michael's ownership, the demand that I leave my own home. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," Margaret said finally, her voice sharp with professional concern. "Someone has given you completely incorrect information. You are absolutely the sole owner of that property. I have copies of all the relevant documents in my files, and I can assure you that no transfer of ownership has ever taken place." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to sit down. "So the papers they showed me, without seeing them, I can't say exactly what they are, but they're certainly not evidence of any ownership transfer. It's possible they're administrative documents that were misinterpreted or—" She paused significantly. "It's possible someone is deliberately trying to mislead you. What should I do?" "First, don't sign anything or agree to anything until we've had a chance to review all the documents together. Second, I'm going to send over certified copies of the true ownership papers, the ones that prove beyond any doubt that you own that house. And third, if someone is trying to defraud you of your property, we need to consider what legal action might be appropriate." After I hung up with Margaret, I sat in my bedroom planning my next move. The documents from the safe were spread across my bed like evidence in a criminal investigation, telling the story of my family's 30-year journey from that empty lot to this beautiful home. But more than just legal proof, these papers represented something deeper. They were evidence of Robert's love and foresight, his determination to protect me even after his death. He'd made sure the house would be mine, legally and completely, because he'd understood what it meant to me. What it meant to us. Jessica and Michael thought they were dealing with a confused, powerless old woman who could be intimidated with official-looking papers and legal-sounding language. They thought I would meekly accept their version of reality and shuffle off to their chosen senior facility without question. They had no idea they were about to face a woman who had spent 30 years fighting for this house, who had mixed concrete and laid tile and planted gardens with her own hands, who had sacrificed everything to build something that would last. And they definitely had no idea that tomorrow morning I wouldn't be walking through that front door alone. I picked up my phone again and called Margaret back. "I have another question," I said. "If someone has been living in my house and claiming ownership fraudulently, what are my rights as the actual owner? In Georgia, the actual property owner has the right to remove unauthorized occupants immediately," she replied. "If they refuse to leave, it's considered trespassing, and you can have them removed by law enforcement. And if I wanted to sell the property? As the sole owner, you have every right to list it, show it, and complete a sale without anyone else's permission or signature. An idea was forming in my mind, not just a way to prove my ownership, but a way to demonstrate exactly how powerless Jessica and Michael really were when faced with the truth. "Margaret," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "I think it's time I reminded some people about who actually owns this house. How quickly can you get me those certified ownership documents? I can have them delivered first thing tomorrow morning." "Perfect. And Margaret? I think I'm going to need the name of a good real estate agent, too." After we hung up, I carefully returned all the documents to the safe except for Robert's will, which I placed on my nightstand where I could see it. Then I walked to my window and looked out at the property we'd transformed together from bare land into this beautiful estate. Tomorrow, Jessica and Michael were going to learn what it felt like to have their entire world turned upside down in the span of a conversation. They were going to discover that the woman they'd dismissed as a powerless guest was actually the queen of the castle they'd been trying to steal. And for the first time in months, I smiled. I woke the next morning with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in months. The fear and confusion that had plagued me for the past 24 hours had crystallized overnight into something much more powerful: righteous anger backed by legal certainty. Margaret Williamson arrived at exactly 9 a.m., just as she'd promised. I watched from my bedroom window as her silver Lexus pulled into the driveway, followed closely by a second car I didn't recognize. A sleek black sedan with Prestige Realty emblazoned on the door. Perfect timing. Jessica and Michael were both in the kitchen, probably planning their next phase of home renovations now that they believed they'd successfully eliminated the last obstacle to their complete takeover. I met Margaret and her companion at the front door before Jessica could intercept them. Margaret was exactly as I remembered, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from decades of handling complex legal matters. Her companion was younger, an impeccably dressed woman in her 40s carrying a leather portfolio. "Eleanor," Margaret said, embracing me warmly, "I'd like you to meet Catherine Rivera from Prestige Realty. She's one of the finest real estate agents in Maplewood Heights, and she's agreed to help us today." "Mrs. Hartwell," Catherine said, extending her hand with a professional smile, "Margaret explained your situation. I want you to know that as the property owner, you have every right to explore your options, including listing the house for sale if that's what you choose to do." Property owner. Those words felt like armor around my shoulders. "Eleanor? Who's at the door?" Jessica's voice carried from the kitchen, sharp with suspicion. "Please, come in," I said, leading Margaret and Catherine into the living room. "I think it's time we had that conversation we discussed." Jessica appeared in the doorway, her face shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the sight of two professional women with legal folders and real estate materials. Michael emerged behind her, his expression wary. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked. I took a deep breath and pulled out the certified documents Margaret had prepared. "I'm clarifying some misconceptions about who actually owns this house." Jessica stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "We already went over this yesterday, Eleanor. Michael inherited the property when Robert died. I showed you the paperwork." "Yes, you did show me paperwork," I agreed, my voice calm and steady. "Unfortunately, those documents were either irrelevant to actual ownership or you fundamentally misunderstood what they meant." I handed the real ownership documents to Michael first, not Jessica, because despite everything, he was still my son, and I wanted to give him the chance to see the truth before his wife could spin it. "These are the actual ownership documents, certified by the county clerk's office and confirmed by the estate attorney who handled your father's affairs," I said. "As you can see, the house was left to me in your father's will, and more importantly, a quitclaim deed filed before his death made me the sole owner of this property." Michael's face went pale as he read through the documents. I watched him realize that everything Jessica had told him was wrong, that the confidence with which she'd presented her case yesterday had been built on a foundation of lies or ignorance. "This can't be right," Jessica said, snatching the papers from Michael's hands. We have documentation that shows. You have documentation that shows administrative filings related to estate taxes, Margaret interrupted smoothly, none of which have any bearing on property ownership. Mrs. Hartwell has been the sole legal owner of this house for over 15 years. Catherine stepped forward with her portfolio. As the property owner, Mrs. Hartwell has asked me to provide a current market analysis for this beautiful home. Based on recent sales in Maplewood Heights and the exceptional condition and custom features of this property, I estimate the current market value at approximately $650,000. $650,000. I watched Jessica's face as the number sank in. Not just the value of what she'd been trying to steal, but the realization that she had no legal claim to any of it. Now, I'm not necessarily planning to sell, I continued, but I wanted to understand my options as the legal owner. Catherine has also explained my rights regarding who lives in my home and under what circumstances. Mrs. Hartwell, Catherine said, consulting her notes, under Georgia law, as the property owner, you have the right to determine who resides in your home and can require anyone to leave with proper notice. Since there's no lease agreement or legal tenancy established, you could ask occupants to vacate immediately if you chose to do so. The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica's confident demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked like panic. Michael stood frozen, the document still in his hands, clearly struggling to process how thoroughly they'd misunderstood the situation. Eleanor, Jessica said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. Surely you're not considering selling your family home? This is where Michael grew up, where you and Robert built your life together. The irony was breathtaking. This was the same woman who had spent months systematically erasing every trace of the life Robert and I had built together, who had just yesterday declared that I needed to leave for the sake of her marriage. You're absolutely right, I said. This is where Robert and I built our life together. This is where Michael grew up. And yesterday, you told me I had 30 days to get out because it was time for you to start your real life here. We were trying to help you transition, Jessica started. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You were trying to steal my home by convincing me I had no legal right to it. Whether through ignorance or deliberate deception, you attempted to manipulate me into giving up everything I've worked for. Margaret stepped forward with another folder. Mrs. Hartwell, given what's occurred here, you may want to consider whether any fraud has been committed. Attempting to obtain property through false claims of ownership can be a serious criminal matter. I watched Jessica's face turn ashen. The word criminal seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Catherine, I continued, I'd like you to conduct a full property tour and prepare a comprehensive listing analysis. I want to understand exactly what my options are. Of course, Catherine replied, pulling out her measuring tape and camera. I'll need to document all the custom features, the landscaping, the room dimensions. This is clearly a unique property with exceptional value. As Catherine began her professional assessment, photographing the hand-built cabinetry, the custom millwork, the carefully planned room layouts, I saw Jessica and Michael exchange panicked glances. Mom? Michael said, his voice weak. You can't seriously be thinking of selling. Why not? I asked. Yesterday you told me this house was too big for one person, too expensive for me to maintain, that I'd be happier somewhere more appropriate for my age. If it's such a burden for me, maybe I should sell it and move to that senior community you picked out. But where would we live? Jessica asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. I imagine you'll find an apartment, like most young couples do when they're starting out, I replied. After all, you're both employed professionals. I'm sure you can afford rent somewhere. The transformation was complete. In the space of one conversation, Jessica and Michael had gone from confident homeowners planning renovations to panicked tenants facing eviction. They'd gone from people with power and control to people entirely dependent on my goodwill. Mrs. Hartwell, Catherine called from the kitchen. The quality of this custom cabinetry is exceptional, and this breakfast nook with the built-in seating, it's exactly the kind of unique feature that luxury buyers are looking for. Each professional compliment felt like vindication, recognition that what Robert and I had created was valuable, special, worth preserving. For months, Jessica had treated our craftsmanship like obstacles to overcome. Now a real estate professional was praising it as premium features that would command top dollar. "Eleanor, please," Jessica said, desperation clear in her voice. "Can't. We work something out. Maybe we misunderstood the legal situation, but surely we can find a solution that works for everyone." I looked at her. This woman who had systematically destroyed my garden, donated my furniture, erased my family photos, and tried to ship me off to a senior facility, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "You know what, Jessica? You're right. We should find a solution that works for everyone." I paused, letting hope flicker across her face before continuing. "Margaret, what would be the appropriate notice period for asking tenants to vacate? In Georgia, for month-to-month tenancy, 30 days' notice is standard," Margaret replied. "Perfect," I said, turning back to Jessica and Michael. "You gave me 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I think 30 days is exactly what you deserve in return." The power had shifted completely. I was no longer the confused old woman being pushed around by people who thought they knew better. I was the homeowner, the property owner, the one with legal rights and options. And tomorrow, when I walked back through that front door, I wouldn't be walking in alone. I'd be walking in with professionals who could document exactly what this house was worth and exactly what my rights were as its owner. For the first time in months, I felt like the queen of my own castle again. 6 months have passed since that transformative October morning when I walked back into my home with Margaret and Catherine, armed with the truth and the legal power to reclaim my life. As I sit here now in my restored living room, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, the one Jessica had tried to replace with something more contemporary, I can hardly believe how completely everything has changed. The house feels like home again. After Jessica and Michael moved out, they found a modern apartment in downtown Riverside within 2 weeks of my ultimatum. I spent months carefully undoing the damage they'd inflicted on my sanctuary. It was like performing surgery on a beloved patient, gently removing the sterile, impersonal elements Jessica had imposed and breathing life back into the spaces that had once told our family's story. The first thing I did was restore my garden. Patricia Chen, my neighbor and longtime friend, helped me source replacement roses from specialty nurseries across Georgia. We couldn't find exact matches for some of the David Austin varieties I'd lost, but we found beautiful alternatives that now bloom alongside the few original plants I managed to rescue from Jessica's modernization. "It's like watching a phoenix rise from ashes," Patricia said last week as we admired the climbing roses that now covered the front porch again. "You've brought this place back to life." The interior restoration took longer but was equally satisfying. I retrieved my grandmother's china from the donation center where Jessica had taken it. Thankfully, it had been too valuable for them to sell quickly. My family photographs returned to their places of honor throughout the house. The abstract art Jessica had hung disappeared into storage, replaced by Robert's landscape paintings and the family portraits that chronicled our life together. Most importantly, I reclaimed the kitchen as the heart of our home. The stainless steel containers gave way to my hand-painted canisters. The harsh LED lighting was replaced with warm pendant lights that cast a golden glow over the breakfast nook where Robert and I had shared so many morning conversations. I even bought a new bread maker, a better model than the one Jessica had donated, and the house once again fills with the scent of fresh baking on weekend mornings. But the real transformation hasn't been in the house itself. It's been in me. For the first time in years, I feel powerful in my own life. Not just because I have legal ownership of my property, but because I've remembered who I am beneath all the doubt and diminishment Jessica had tried to impose on me. I'm not a confused old woman who needs other people to make decisions for her. I'm Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, and I built something magnificent with my own hands. The story of my confrontation with Jessica and Michael spread through Maplewood Heights like wildfire. Catherine Rivera, the real estate agent, couldn't help but share the tale of the homeowner who'd been almost swindled out of her own property. It became legendary in local real estate circles, a cautionary tale about assuming you know who owns what, and an inspiring story about standing up for yourself no matter how powerless you might feel. Margaret Williamson told me that 3 other clients had come to her with similar situations after hearing my story. Apparently, adult children attempting to manipulate elderly parents out of their property is more common than anyone wants to admit. Thanks to the precedent we set, Margaret now includes detailed property ownership verification in all her estate planning consultations. The financial freedom I gained from understanding my property's true value has transformed my retirement planning too. At 58, I'm not ready to stop working, but knowing I have over $600,000 in equity gives me options. I'd never imagined. I've reduced my hours at the insurance company and started doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses in town, work that challenges me intellectually while giving me the flexibility to enjoy my restored home. I've also started something I never had time for during the years of financial struggle: traveling. Last month, I took my first vacation in decades, a week in Savannah, exploring the historic homes and gardens I'd only read about in magazines. Standing in those beautifully preserved houses, seeing how other families had built legacies that lasted for generations, I felt a deep pride in what Robert and I had accomplished here in Maplewood Heights. The relationship with Michael has been the most complicated part of this journey. For weeks after they moved out, we barely spoke. He was angry and embarrassed, claiming I'd humiliated him in front of his wife and made him look like a fool. It took time for him to understand that his humiliation came from his own choices, not my defense of them. Jessica filed for divorce 3 months ago. According to the gossip network that keeps Maplewood Heights informed about everyone's business, she'd told friends that she couldn't stay married to someone from such a backwards family. Michael was devastated, but I think losing his wife was less painful than losing his self-respect. He started visiting again in January, tentative at first, clearly unsure of his welcome. Those early conversations were awkward and stilted, full of unspoken apologies and careful politeness. But gradually, something began to shift. Maybe it was seeing the house restored to its former warmth, or maybe it was time to process what had really happened between us. "I don't know how I let things get so out of control," he told me one evening as we sat in the family room, eating my homemade chili and cornbread. Jessica made everything seem so reasonable, so logical. I thought I was being a good husband by supporting her vision. "You were being a good husband," I replied carefully. "But you forgot about being a good son. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, like restoring an antique piece of furniture that's been damaged. Some days are better than others. Sometimes I catch flashes of the boy who used to help me plant flowers and proudly show off the rooms his father had built. Other times, I see the man who stood silently while his wife tried to erase me from my own life. But we're trying, and that's enough for now. The house has become a gathering place again, but this time on my terms. I host book club meetings for women from my church, garden club planning sessions, and occasional dinners for the neighbors who supported me through the darkest months of Jessica's occupation. These people understand that homes are more than just real estate investments. They're repositories of love, memory, and family history. Catherine Rivera stops by every few months to check on me and update the property valuation for insurance purposes. She's become a friend, and she often brings potential clients to see the house as an example of what's possible when people invest love and craftsmanship into their homes. "This place should be in a magazine," she said during her last visit. It's a perfect example of how custom details and quality construction create lasting value. You and Robert built something that will be beautiful for generations. Generations. That's what I think about now as I plan for the future. Not just my immediate comfort or convenience, but what this house will mean to the family members who come after me. Maybe Michael will have children someday. Children who will play in the backyard where their father learned to ride a bike, who will help their grandmother tend the rose garden, who will understand that some things are worth preserving because they represent the best of who we are. I've updated my will to be absolutely clear about my intentions. When I die, Michael will inherit this house, but not before, and not unless he demonstrates that he understands its true value. Not its market price, but its worth as a symbol of love, determination, and the belief that ordinary people can build extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. As I finish my coffee and prepare to start another day in the home I fought to keep, I feel a deep satisfaction that has nothing to do with revenge or vindication. Jessica and Michael thought they could push me aside because they saw me as weak, old, and powerless. They forgot that the woman they were trying to diminish was the same woman who had built this house brick by brick, who had worked 3 jobs to keep it after losing her husband who had never given up on anything she truly loved. I didn't just keep my house. I kept my dignity, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. I proved that sometimes the quietest person in the room is also the strongest, and that underestimating someone based on their age or gender can be a costly mistake. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, and to fight for what you've earned. Home isn't just a place where you live, it's a place where you belong, where your history lives in every room, where your love has been transformed into something lasting and beautiful, and nobody, not even family, has the right to take that away from you. This house on Willowbrook Lane will always be more than just my home. It's proof that dreams can become reality when you're willing to work for them, that love really can build something that lasts, and that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight not for what you want, but for what you've already earned. I built this house. I saved this house. And now, finally, I'm home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.